My name is Ken Williams. I'm a use of force police reform expert. I'm also a wrongful death expert witness consultant. I'm, in addition to that, a retired homicide detective, and I also am a member of LEAP. I wanted to be able to be one of those people to join the ranks and file of policing to actually promote better trust, better community relations. And what I found inside of policing disturbed me as a law enforcement professional, because from the very beginning to the end of my career, I witnessed discrimination firsthand. And I witnessed citizens who couldn't get out of the way of the drug policies that were incarcerating them. If there were no policy to go out and arrest people based on the possession of a marijuana, for instance, we wouldn't have some of this disparity that's inside prisons today. I understood the negative impact in the streets that I patrolled created joblessness based on the stigmatization of someone being locked up for a mental health condition. That didn't sit well with me. I understood the fact that once a person has to check the box for gainful employment, they're actually taking themselves out of the running for a job. I understood that. I understood, the poverty and the impoverishment that I witnessed in the city of Brockton wasn't going to stop until this policy that's upstream, that was created by, back in the 60s, that created all of this policy to go and target people. Until we go back upstream and eliminate that policy and eliminate drug prohibition, we can't stop and eradicate the violence and everything that's happening downstream of that policy that's impacting people negatively. Policing in the military is completely different than policing in America, or it should be. But what we found is that there's been this merging of militarization of policing, similar to the militarization of our people, men and women who are serving and protecting the country outside the U.S. borders. And that is something that is destroying the very fabric of policing as well, because when you have these, instead of officer friendly being friendly and being involved with community policing, officer friendly is now carrying around assault rifles, officer friendly has tanks, officer friendly is throwing grenades at people and stuff like that. These are not what we should have policing in America be about. And the drug war is what funded a lot of these agencies to have all of this proliferation of this equipment and transform officer friendly from community policing to this more militarized, mechanized machine. And we need to go back. We need to go backwards and have community policing be the very fabric of what law enforcement is about in America, because if you can't, as a former homicide detective, if I can't convince people to talk to me, I can't solve crime. And if I can't solve crime, I shouldn't be able to blame the people for me not being able to convince them to talk to me. That's my fault. Certainly. I mean, I would say probably 99% of my homicide investigations went back to street narcotics. I'll give you a story. I was actually decorated in 2009 at the Boston State House as a top cop in Massachusetts for the solving a crime in Brockton that involved a family man who was a cab driver. He one morning at 2 o'clock in the morning was called by a payphone to pick up a cab fare. When he picked up the cab fare, a gun was put to the back of his head. A gun went off, bullet went into the back of his head, and he died. I had a chance to sit down across the table with them and interview them as the homicide detective. And they were there trying to get money to buy drugs. If we did not have this type of proliferation of drugs coming into the country based on a for-profit mechanism, there wasn't a $65 billion smuggling operation into America prior to 1968. The policy created the incentive to create risk and reward, and at the same time create violence at the downstream street corner level. If we eliminate the risk reward carried upstream, we eliminate some of that violence, a major part of that violence downstream on the street level. And that's something that I've seen time and time again with these homicide investigations that I was, on the ground, up front, personal with people and talking with them about. The whistleblower is a False Claims Act situation where, as a former law enforcement officer, I understand, based on my experience inside policing, that there's a culture of silence, and that custom, culture, practice, pattern has to break in order for there to actually be real change where people can start to trust policing. That culture, it promotes people remaining silent, not understanding their First Amendment right to report on matters that are of public concern. Matters of public concern are when officers witness the bad cops that they understand are apples, rotten apples in the barrel, out there beating people, using excessive force, using derogatory language, falsely arresting people, falsely incriminating people, planting evidence. It's up to law enforcement officers within the rank and file to understand that remaining silent doesn't solve a problem. I want to be able to cultivate whistleblowers nationally who are insiders, that have credibility, they have knowledge of all types of discrimination, all types of acts that are happening inside police agencies, but they don't even trust being able to go within internally to report this. In fact, many police officers, because they are aware of other people who have tried to report egregious acts up the chain of command, many whistleblowers become former law enforcement officers. I'm one of them. So I realize the pitfall in the reporting mechanism. So I'm testifying, like for instance, I've been in Maryland at the House of Representatives to afford good cops better whistleblower protections. This is something that I think is a solution that we should have implemented around the country, where we try to afford good cops better whistleblower protections, and at the academy level, all the way up into when they're police officers, afford them better understanding of what the First Amendment is, that they have a duty to not just report things internally, but if they report things outside the rank and file, they actually afford themselves whistleblower protections, First Amendment protections. One of the instances involved a gentleman that was wrongfully arrested in the city of Brockton. He told me what his experience was at 4 o'clock in the morning with several police officers. What made his complaint extremely credible to me, without going into too much detail, was he was able to recite what officers, law enforcement officers, use for codes. He was able to recite those codes. There's no way he would have known what that stuff meant. I watched and witnessed firsthand members within my own rank and file cover up administrative and criminal acts. I ended up having to testify against one of the sergeants at a disciplinary hearing. I also assisted this gentleman when he filed a civil rights lawsuit against the police agency. I assisted him and his lawyers with helping them uncover how to prove their claim. That claim was eventually settled. I myself have filed a First Amendment retaliation claim as a result of this against the police agency. That's now in the appellate court. And I also filed a secondary action, which is the Whistleblower False Claim Act case, which is my trying to change the pattern, practice, custom culture of policing nationally, not just in Brockton, but nationally. I recently just came back from Wilmington, Delaware, where I did a TED Talk, Beyond Ferguson, Detectives Whistleblower Lawsuit Will Reform Police in America. It's a matter of trying to promote the fact that as people start to become informed about solutions, I don't want people walking around and just protesting in an awareness campaign. There has to be a legislative piece to this. LEAP, what I'm trying to do, these are all the legislative pieces which go along with the awareness campaign. If there's no action to actually change policy, change law, change the practice, the awareness campaign is ineffective. So that's the reason why, again, I want to go back to the fact that I joined LEAP because in partnerships and with stakeholders in some sort of community police action like this, you get the greatest bang for the buck. And time is of the essence, especially in this day and age where we have so much hostility that's going on between the community and police relationship, when in fact they're one and the same. We shouldn't be trying to, we should say, when someone is a victim of gun violence, whether they're a police officer or a citizen, we should be saying, wow, condolences to every victim of gun violence, because it all goes back to this war on drugs. If we stop the war on drugs, we stemmed the tide of all this violence downstream.